The Hypno's Lullaby D-side mod just dropped, and as the name implies, it's a alternate version of the original Hypno's Lullaby mod. And the first character that we see pop up in the mod is Xatu, who of course is replacing Hypno. But what I find most interesting here is that Xatu has a whole backstory that explains why he's here, why he's evil, and what likely happened to Boyfriend in the mod. Now Xatu's backstory is actually a bit sad because he wasn't always evil. Back when he was a Natu, he was actually a happy-go-lucky little guy that loved to tell the future of his fellow Pokemon. And as he will later find out, he actually should have been looking into his own future because life was about to get really bad for him. One day, people from the Safari Zone company actually came to Natu's area and captured him so that they could force him into the Safari Zone as a possible Pokemon to catch. Now at first, Natu didn't think his new home was that bad until trainers started coming in and throwing mud at him. And if you've ever played the Pokemon games, you understand this reference. And since the Safari Zone doesn't close, Natu was basically getting attacked by trainers all day and night as they tried to weaken him enough to capture him, but he was too smart and too quick to actually be caught. And while this did go on for a long time, eventually his life changed for the better when he had an encounter with a trainer that was different from the rest. Instead of trying to throw mud at Natu or catch him, he simply started to speak to him in a calming voice. The boy introduced himself as Zach, and when he saw how dirty and injured Natu was, he decided to clean him up and bandage his wounds. Being grateful for the kindness, Natu started to fly around Zach with joy, but he was interrupted by a Heracross that had also been treated poorly by trainers. And in an attempt to actually take out some of that frustration, the Heracross tried to attack Natu. But right before the attack landed, Zach actually jumped in front of it and took the attack. Which is a huge deal. If you play Pokemon, you know that Heracross hits like a truck. Now when all the other Pokemon in the forest saw what Zach did, they all came together and basically scared off the Heracross. But after taking that hit, Zach had to be transported out of the Safari Zone to a hospital. And while this was all happening, Xatu was basically just standing there in shock because he never expected that a human could risk his life for a Pokemon. And it was in that moment that Natu knew he had to see Zach again. So later that night, Natu hastily planned to sneak out of the Safari Zone, but quickly realized that the fences were too strong for him to break through. And he was actually still too injured to just fly over. But luckily, the Heracross that had attacked Zach felt guilty for his actions and ripped a hole in the fence for Natu to escape through. And using his future sight ability, he was able to actually get a vision of the hospital that Zach had been taken to. But escaping was only the first hurdle that Natu had to overcome, because soon after he escaped, the employees of the Safari Zone were on his trail, with the full intent being to drag him back to the zone. And it was due to this fear and the desperation to see Zach again that Natu was able to evolve into Xatu. And with this, he was able to escape the Safari Goons, but not before one of them actually cut a huge gash into his wing, making it to where he couldn't fly. But even with that setback, Xatu still made it to Zach's hospital, but he was met with a depressing sight when he got there. Zach had suffered too strong of a hit from Heracross and he did not actually survive. And this is where Xatu loses his mind. He literally almost kills every single person in the hospital. And after his killing spree, he tried to escape to the roof in order to avoid the Safari Goons, and while he was on the roof, he actually saw the spirit of Zach waving goodbye. Soon after that, he was overcome and captured. But to my surprise, the Goons didn't actually kill him like I thought they would, but instead they actually placed him back in the Safari Zone and labeled him a super dangerous Pokemon. And they said that only the bravest of trainers should pursue him. And the company basically did this because they thought it would be a good way to get new customers in and to make them a ton of cash. But now that Xatu is back in the forest of the Safari Zone, he basically kills any Pokemon that comes into his territories and will even attack any trainers on site. He even killed the Heracross that was responsible for Zach's death. Now I also think that this helps us understand why girlfriend and boyfriend are here. I assume that boyfriend went to the Safari Zone to catch some Pokemon and actually ended up going too deep and finding Xatu. Or as it says in the mod, maybe Xatu even lured him to his area. And I assume either one of two things have happened. Either boyfriend is now lost in the woods, or Xatu did actually end up injuring him. And I assume that this is why girlfriend is actually battling against Xatu. Now just to be clear, I highly doubt that boyfriend is dead or really even seriously injured, because D-Sly's boyfriend is technically one of the strongest, if not the strongest version of boyfriend at this time. The next song in this mod is called Distortion, and this is the D-Side's version of the song Death Toll, which was a song with the old man that was actually the devil, or aka Beelzebub, and Don. And for those of you that are curious, the backstory for that one goes like this. And the creepypasta basically talks about how a young girl inherited a copy of the Pokemon game from her brother because he simply didn't like Gen 4 Pokemon. And apparently he had hacked into the game and got like 6 level 100 Rayquazas. Since the young lady hated this Pokemon, she went ahead and started trading those Rayquazas for other Pokemon. And one of the Pokemon that she traded the Rayquaza for was Bronzong. Now when she got this Pokemon, she noticed that its nickname was Hellbell. And since she was very religious, she was going to get rid of the Pokemon at first, but she noticed that she couldn't trade it and she also couldn't put it back in the PC. And even when she tried, it gave her a message saying, I can't go back on my own, you need to take me back. So trying to follow the direction of this Pokemon, she does end up trying to take it back to its original owner, and she ends up finding an old man in a suit. Now I believe that this old man is supposed to be the devil, and I say this because if you look at the actual mod, it looks like they're actually in a part of hell there. But in the creepypasta, he also asks for the woman's true name, and he also tells her to breathe into the actual Game Boy. And once she does this, he says, thank you, now you belong to me. And from that moment on, she was basically like a cursed human, meaning that she could barely sleep anymore. Any food that she ate basically tasted like ashes, and whenever she would go around any type of wildlife, they would either bark at her or just run away. Now in the D-size version, we have two characters named Ray and Volo, who are both from the Pokemon game Legend Arceus. Now, when actually playing the game, it seems like Volo is a nice guy and he's kind of helping Ray through all this stuff, but it turns out that he's basically just using you for his own goal. The goal basically being to collect the plates, take them to the Spirit Pillar so that he can basically take Arceus' power and create a new world in his own image. And I assume that in the mod here, he actually is successful in his plan. Now the next song is called Digital, and it's the D-side version of Insomnia, which is a song with the redhead kid named Silver and is sleeping for Ralligator. And the backstory for them goes like this. He actually comes from the video game version of Lost Silver. Gold can run into him and battle his sleeping for Ralligator, which is what we see here on the screen. What's kind of funny though is in the mod, Cyndaquil uses something called Nightmare, and it basically turns for Ralligator back into Totodile, and then he simply faints after that. And the last words that Silver actually says to you is even. Now a lot of people have different interpretations of this, but in my opinion, I think that this kind of shows how a lot of these kids in the Pokemon games kind of have their moment of glory and then they just kind of fade out. As you see in the actual mod, he basically has no mouth. It looks like it's been sealed in, and his eyes are literally black, just sunken and gone. It's almost as if they're saying that as these kids reach their peak, they no longer have anything to actually offer. They're just getting replaced by new kids, and the Pokemon adventure just starts over. And I think this is part of the reason that we see Feraligatr literally being dormant here, meaning that he has no more room to grow. And now that Silver has served his purpose, he's basically just going to be forgotten out here in this dark, gloomy forest. Now in the D-size version, we're fighting against a person named Tai Kamiya, who is the main protagonist in the Digimon Adventure anime and the show. Now in this mod, he takes the place of Silver, basically becoming a silent and forgotten adventurer. And even though we don't see it in the mod, apparently Greymon is in the background sleeping, which is a terrifying prospect if you remember what he looks like. The character was an absolute beast. And while I never really expected to see Digimon in a mod, it does make sense that Digimon would be like the D-side version of Pokemon when you really think about it. The last song in the mod is called Mistreated, and this is the D-side version of the song Amnesia, which backstory goes like this. The story basically starts with a kid that really wanted a Wigglytuff or a Jigglypuff, so they ended up trading with somebody and they got a Wigglytuff at level 26, but there was something off about the Wigglytuff from the start. The Wigglytuff had a name that was called Disabled, and when you looked at the Pokemon nature, it said Gloomy. And I'm pretty sure even today there is no gloomy nature, but definitely back in the day there wasn't a gloomy nature for Pokemon. I think Shy might have been the closest thing to gloomy. But basically when the trainer got this Wigglytuff, it only knew Sing, so he taught him a couple of other moves and then went out to start battling. The first Pokemon that they ran into was Ponyta, which is why we actually see Ponyta in this mod. And as he was trying to attack Ponyta, he realized that Sing didn't work, but also none of the other moves worked as well. The thing that was the most creepy is that when he tried to use Sing time and time again, it just kept saying that Sing was disabled. And the thing that was even more creepy is that the Ponyta in the game lost its regular sprite look and actually just looked terrified. The face that the Ponyta is making in the mod actually is a good representation of this. The trainer tried to battle two Ponytas and each time they were able to run away because Wigglytuff just couldn't do any damage and more importantly, couldn't sing. Now the part that's really creepy about this is that while the kid is holding his DS trying to figure out what's going on with his Pokemon, he starts to hear a voice coming through the actual speakers. And the voice is basically asking, why can't I sing? And it gets even weirder when Disable asks the boy, can you sing? Now initially the little kid says no, but then Disable starts to scream through this DS, just saying sing, sing, louder and louder. And even though this kid was trying to tell Disable that he could not sing, the Pokemon thought that he was lying, it just kept screaming through the DS. Eventually the kid dropped the DS and just ran out of the room, and later on he decided to just trade the Wigglytuff to some other kid. Now, those of you who are familiar with Pokemon creepypastas will understand this ending. When he traded this Wigglytuff, he actually traded it for a Cyndaquil, and the Cyndaquil's name was Hurry. If you understand that reference, put it down in the comments. Now here in the D-size version, this Togepi is purple because it was born with a disformity. When it was still inside the egg, a bunch of trainers got together and started kicking and throwing the egg around for no reason other than to be cruel. And after they grew tired of torturing the egg, they got bored and threw it to the side of the road. Somehow, Togepi still ended up surviving all this abuse and even managed to hatch and have all its mobility, meaning they was able to move around normally. But the downside is, now its skin is like perpetually purple, and in some angles it almost looks like its eyes are bloodshot, and that's obviously from being beaten up so much. Now one day a trainer actually found Togepi and caught it, naming it Mistreated because he understood that it was obviously beaten up pretty bad by whatever trainer it had before. But it seemed that ultimately this trainer didn't really have a whole lot of empathy for Togepi, because after just one battle, which is against this shiny Dratini here, the trainer ended up releasing Togepi, saying that it was just too unnatural to keep. Which is extra sad when you think of how Togepi is just a baby Pokemon. With that being said, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out one of these videos on the screen here. Subscribe today, become a member of the Oris Force, and we'll see you tomorrow with another video. Peace, peace.